Greetings, everyone, and we invite you to this moment that we have come together for this cause. And I ask that you would join with me in prayer. Stone of the road we trod, bitter the chastening rods felt in the days when hope unborn had died. Yet with a steady beat have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers sighed. We have come over the ways that with tears have been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughter, to now we stand at last, where the white gleam of thy bright star is cast. We give you thanks, O God, for the moment that brings us together and for the cause that brings us together. We give you glory and honor for the commitment of all who have planned, worked, and the energy of their tireless efforts that have contributed to this meeting. And we ask your blessings on whatever decisions are made, whatever cause is shared, whatever energy is multiplied, that would help us to move from where we go from here to address the needs that have brought us together. To you we give glory and honor and praise. Amen.
Good evening. My name is Karen Williams. I am a member of the Charleston branch of the NAACP, and I've been asked to be the moderator this evening. And I'm honored to be here with you with the Political Action Committee, who has planned this event. I first heard about the amendments and it took my breath away. And we felt as an NAACP chapter that we needed to have more discussion about this and get the right word out to people, because I truly enjoy the commercial that's on television at this time. And it says, when they go low, we go to the poll. But when we go to the poll, we must be well-informed voters. And so it's important that we're educated, that we are knowledgeable, that we know what we're voting for in the upcoming general election. There are so many things that are coming up, so many activities, but we're very honored today to have people here who are knowledgeable and are going to give us some good advice on the amendments that are on the ballot that we will be voting on in the general election in November. And our featured speakers this evening are Eli Baumwell, the Policy Director of ACLU of West Virginia. He is going to be talking about Amendments 1 and 3. And then we have Rick Wilson, who is the Director of West Virginia Economic Justice Project, the American Friends Service Committee, who is going to be talking about the Amendment 2. And then Fred Albert, the president of the American Federation of Teachers of West Virginia, and he will be discussing Amendment 4. We're going to ask that if you have questions, to put your questions in the chat, and we will monitor the questions, and we will address the questions at the end of the presentations. And I'm sure that we want to have the most time that we can for our speakers. So at this time, we're going to ask Eli Baumwell to speak about Amendments 1 and 2. Welcome, Eli.
Thank you very much, Karen, for that introduction. And again, thank you to everyone here. I'm gonna get started by sharing my screen. I've got some simple PowerPoints. They're pretty simple and straightforward because I've picked the simplest of the amendments. So bear with me here as I get those all set up. Can everyone see those PowerPoints? Excellent, great. Okay, so I'm going to get started here. And again, thank you to the Charleston branch of the NAACP for having me. Again, I'm starting with Amendment 1. This is the clarification of the judiciary's role in impeachment amendment. And in full disclosure, the ACLU does have a position on this amendment. We oppose it, and I'll get into why that is a little bit later on here in the presentation. But we'll go ahead and get started with talking about what it is and why it's been proposed. Oh, already going too far. Bear with me here. Let me get us back. All right. Start this thing over. Technology, isn't it great? All right. My apologies. There we go. Okay. There we go. So we're going to start at the beginning, despite my running through the whole thing already. We're going to start just by looking at what the text of the amendment says. And this is the proposed amendment. So this is what would actually look like in our state constitution if it were to be changed. Anything where you see anything that's struck through, that's language that would be taken out. Anything that you see underlined is new language. And as you can see, most of what's being changed, a lot of what's being changed is just updating terms to make the Constitution comport with how we speak in modern times. The key thing, though, where the rubber hits the road is this bottom sentence, this last sentence that says, no court of this state has any authority or jurisdiction by writ or otherwise to intercede or intervene in or interfere with any impeachment proceedings of the House of Delegates or the Senate conducted hereunder, nor is any judgment rendered by the Senate following a trial of impeachment reviewable by any state of the court. So, of course, when you go and vote on the amendment, the ballot isn't going to have the full text of the amendment. It's not going to have the full text there for you. Instead, it'll summarize what the amendment says. So the summary that will be included in the ballot is what you see here on the screen. So this is what should say on the ballot, clarifying that courts have no authority or jurisdiction to intercede or intervene or interfere with impeachment proceedings of the House of Delegates or the Senate, and specifying that a judgment rendered by the Senate following an impeachment trial is not reviewable by any court of the state. That's what you'll actually see on the ballot. It's a pretty basic summary that slightly simplifies the language that we saw that'll be added. And at its core, it's a pretty straightforward amendment. It says the court can't get involved in impeachment proceedings. They can't stop or intervene in the House of Delegates, and they can't review a judgment by the Senate. And before I dive a little bit deeper into the ramifications of that, I want to back up and explore a little bit about why this amendment is being offered. So if you followed West Virginia politics at all in the last 5 years, this is probably a story you're at least somewhat familiar with. But for anyone who hasn't or who just wants a refresher, this is a brief, and I tried to keep it as brief as I could, summary of what happened. And there is some political background to this, and that's important for understanding sort of the broader context. So you have to start back in 2016, when the West Virginia legislature switched from 80 years of Democratic control to control by the Republicans. And at that time, many positions in both the Board of Public Works and in the state Supreme Court were still held by either Democrats or people who had Democratic leanings. And they were sometimes a barrier to some of the major Republican policy priorities. For example, the West Virginia Supreme Court of Appeals, which has 5 sitting justices, had 3 who had at least Democratic leanings and 2 who were more Republican leaning. So with that background, in 2017, news began to emerge about then West Virginia Supreme Court of Appeals Justice Alan Lawfrey and misuse of state resources. Notably, he was found using state money and state personnel to have a couch that belonged to the state Supreme Court removed from his house. There was an attempt to impeach him in 2018 by Democrats, but that was not taken up. And at least some of the reason may have been that Lawfrey is one of the justices who is considered Republican leaning. However, throughout 2018, more revelations came to light about misuse of funds and lavish spending by a number of the Supreme Court justices. So by June of 2018, it got to the point that Governor Justice felt he had to call a special session to initiate impeachment proceedings, and the House approved an investigation. And although these proceedings initially focused on Justice Lawfrey, soon the entire court was brought into the investigation. So on July 11th, slightly before the formal impeachment proceedings really began, Justice Ketchum resigned. He would later plead guilty to personal use of a state vehicle and misuse of a state gas card. After the House Judiciary Committee conducted an investigation, Democrats in the committee recommended impeachment of Justice Lawfrey. However, in the end, a divided committee passed articles of impeachment against all 4 sitting justices. Again, one of them had already resigned at that point. The House eventually adopted those articles, and that's to say that they formally impeached all of those justices. However, it is worth noting that only the impeachment against Justice Lawfrey were unanimous or even close to unanimous. For all the other justices, it was a much more divided vote. And a brief reminder here, just to step back, impeachment doesn't actually remove someone from office. Impeachment is just sort of a formal recognition of wrongdoing. It's the judgment done by the Senate that can remove someone from office or impose other penalties. So that's what happened up to that point. After the House impeached the justices, but before the Senate began deliberations on judgments, Justice Davis resigned. Now, as the Senate began deliberations about judgments, several things kind of happened all about the same period of time. The Senate rejected a motion to censure. It's a formal reprimand, but not removal. Both Justice Workman, who's considered Democratic leaning, and Justice Walker, who's considered Republican leaning. About the same time, Justice Workman filed a suit about the process. While judgment deliberations were going on against Justice Walker, they were delayed for Justice Workman because of these court actions. The Senate eventually decided to censure Justice Walker. Again, it's notable because when there was a proposal to take the same action with a Democratic-leaning justice, they refused to do so. Ultimately, though, Justice Workman's suit was successful, and the courts halted proceedings against all of the remaining justices, including then resigned Justice Davis. They were continuing to try to impose a judgment against her because she had been impeached by the House. The courts halted that as well. A new special session was called at that point to consider impeachment against Justice Lawfrey, who subsequently resigned and was later convicted in federal court. So in the end, the fallout of all this, there were 3 Supreme Court seats that opened up. And as some of my friends here, I know Julie in particular could tell you a whole lot, Julie Archer could tell you a whole lot about this. That ensuing election became a hotbed for political dark money and really a dramatic remaking of the state Supreme Court. There were also attempts between that time period and where we are now to pass this amendment. But it took a supermajority taking over in 2021 before the Republicans had the requisite 2/3 votes in each chamber to put this amendment on the ballot. So this has been an issue ever since all of these impeachment proceedings took place. So through that history, we can kind of understand what drove this amendment. It was the legislature's attempt to impeach justices of the state Supreme Court that was stopped because of court intervention. Now, the legislature felt that they couldn't perform one of the checks they have on the other government branches because another branch got involved. And it's further complicated because the branch that got involved, the branch that intervened, was the branch facing the impeachment proceedings. Now, I want to point, this is a really unusual situation. Impeachment of judicial officials is pretty rare throughout all American jurisdictions. And that's a point that some of the opponents of the amendment have made. This isn't really a necessary amendment because it was such a unique situation. Again, it's pretty rare to impeach judicial officials, and it's virtually unheard of that an entire high court would face impeachment at the same time. It's also unusual because it's rare for courts to intervene in impeachment at all. Again, as proponents of this amendment will tell you, impeachment is a political, not a legal process. So despite the fact that impeachment follows a process that looks like a criminal proceeding, it's not actually a criminal proceeding. And in fact, in the past, courts have often declined to get involved in impeachment proceedings for that reason. It's a general rule that courts have not to get involved in controversies that are political and not legal. So it's one of the things that people said, hey, look, this is a political thing, courts don't have to get involved. And it's also, and this is why I mentioned all the politics as we went through this, because it's impossible in this situation to ignore the politics of it. After a swing in party control, the impeachment proceeding was used in a way that would clear the state Supreme Court and could and actually did allow for an ideological remake of the court that was more in line with the legislature. Now, I'm not saying that was the actual intent of the people who played roles in this saga, but regardless of that intent, the appearance of partisanship tainted the whole process. And it did raise a lot of concerns that without intervention from the court, an even more dramatic shift could have been possible and could be used in this way in the future. So I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that the ACLU of West Virginia opposes this amendment. And to a small degree, our opposition is rooted in the concern for partisan abuse. Although, again, I want to go back and say we do recognize impeachment is a political process, and courts are generally right to avoid making rulings in those situations. But what we oppose is the complete lack of control. So the basic rules for impeachment and the possible judgments that can be given after an impeachment by the Senate are rooted in the West Virginia Constitution. And in matters of constitutional interpretation and in constitutional enforcement, we look to the courts. That is the court's role. So if you fully remove the court's authority to get involved in any impeachment or any judgment, you limit the court's ability to ensure that those basic rules, even those ground rules, are followed. So in the most extreme example, a hyper-partisan legislature could bypass all procedural safeguards and impeach an official who crossed their agenda and issue a judgment beyond what's legal. And there would be no recourse, no way to go back and reverse that, no protections for that individual or for our political process more generally, except to hope that the voters would vote them out the next time around. That would be the only hope, and it would be after the fact. It wouldn't change what had already happened. Now, during the legislative process, I do want to be clear, we communicated that this could be remedied, that the proposed amendment had allowed courts to intervene only when the question wasn't exceeding the constitutional authority. They could have done that. It would have been a more limited area where they could have intervened, and that would have taken away our opposition. But absent any protection like that, we see a real potential for abuse that's unlikely, but potentially very, very serious. And so again, that's why the ACLU opposes this amendment. So again, there you go. That's a brief rundown of what the amendment is, where it comes from, and what our position is. I think we're saving questions for the end. So I'm going to skip over and go right on to our next presentation, talking about Amendment 3. Go ahead and get that queued up for y'all here. Okay. So again, we're gonna go in. We're gonna talk about Amendment 3 now. And we're also gonna be jumping amendments. And this is the amendment that's called to authorize the incorporation of churches or religious denominations amendment. And the good news is that this may be one of the least controversial amendments we have to discuss this evening. So I expect we're gonna go pretty quick on this one. I'll leave plenty of time for everyone else. Again, full disclosure, the ACLU of West Virginia does have a position on this amendment. We support it. And in fact, as far as I'm aware, no other advocacy organization has taken any formal position on this amendment. So just like last time, I'm going to start with the actual text of the amendment. Again, strike throughs are language that'll be taken out, underlines is language that'll be added. And again, you can see this is very simple in terms of what the amendment does. The line that says churches can't incorporate is removed, and a line is added that says churches can incorporate. So you probably picked up by now, the ballot will have a summary of the amendment, and the summary is very straightforward. It couldn't be any easier. Here it is. If it passes, churches and other religious denominations will be able to incorporate. Very straightforward in terms of what it does. But so again, knowing what it says is pretty straightforward. Knowing what it actually does is where things tend to get kind of complicated. And why does it matter now? Why is this coming up now? And so I'm going to give you, again, very brief rundown of the history here. And this one dates all the way back to colonial America, where incorporation was a very special privilege. It was granted to only a select few institutions. And in fact, it took an act of the legislature to incorporate organizations. They had to formally agree to do it through the legislature. At the Virginia General Assembly realized that this could quickly come at odds with the Jeffersonian commitment to religious neutrality. After all, you wouldn't want the General Assembly allowing some religious institutions to incorporate, not others. So the solution was very simple. They put it right into the Constitution that religious organizations couldn't incorporate. So it was a piece in the Constitution of Virginia originally. Only a handful of other states only had that prohibition. Other states dealt with incorporation in different ways for religious bodies, but a handful of them did put that prohibition in. But by the mid-1800s, incorporation was a pretty standard administrative practice for limiting liability and allowing institutions to operate as legal entities. Any of the new states that were added after about that time didn't have a prohibition like this. And actually, a number of older states went back and removed the prohibition as they rewrote and revised their state constitutions. But Virginia stuck. And when West Virginia broke away from Virginia, we actually kept that provision in our new state constitution, where it's remained unchanged and unchallenged. So that takes us through a lot of history. Now I'm going to fast forward all the way up to 2002, when the ACLU, along with Jerry Falwell, yes, that Jerry Falwell, sued Virginia over their prohibition. The Fourth Circuit of Appeals struck down the prohibition in Virginia, ruling it an unconstitutional barrier on free exercise of religion. And here's the thing, the Fourth Circuit is also the controlling circuit for West Virginia. So since 2002, West Virginia has actually been allowed to and has been allowing religious bodies to incorporate. So we're already doing what this amendment says we can do because of this Fourth Circuit ruling. Now, in 2006, Virginia passed an amendment very similar to ours, removing that obsolete language from their state constitution, leaving West Virginia as the only state that had this prohibition in the Constitution. So that's sort of a quick rundown of the history. So what's the controversy? What's the issue? What's the problem with this amendment? But there really isn't any. We're removing language that's already been overruled by the federal courts. Now, I do know that some people who are not entirely familiar with the background have expressed some concern because of the connotations of corporate personhood that came out of the Citizens United decision, and the way that sometimes religious freedom is increasingly used as a sword to impose one religious viewpoint on everyone else. And so while I understand those concerns, those issues really aren't at play here. Allowing, and again, it's allowing, it's not requiring religious bodies to incorporate, lets them operate as a charitable nonprofit for tax purposes, limits the liability for individuals, and I'll explain that a little bit more here in just a moment, and grants recognition of the religious body as a legal entity. Incorporation also has some obligations, so you have to file fees when you incorporate, you have to adopt formal bylaws that have to be filed with the state, you have to have a formal board of directors, and you've got some other legal obligations as an incorporated entity. Again, that's already standard across the country for religious denominations that want to incorporate, and has actually been standard here in West Virginia since 2002, since that ruling. Now, I do know some people have also expressed some concern because one benefit of incorporation, like I mentioned, is limited liability. And a very short explanation of limited liability is that if an incorporated body is sued, judgments only go against the body. Board members can't be held personally liable for debts or financial obligations. Now, in general, it's a really beneficial thing in terms of encouraging investment, encouraging entrepreneurship, and encouraging people to serve on boards. But it doesn't make it any harder to sue the entity. That's, again, some of the things I've heard is people concerned, well, it's limited liability, you can't sue the entity. No, you can still sue them. But it's easy enough to do that. And there are even in extreme cases, and you can think of things like mismanagement of funds, sex abuse, I know has come up when we've talked about religious bodies, or other really egregious examples. There are ways to go in and still hold individual members liable. Can be a little bit more difficult, but it's not impossible. So it's not an absolute prohibition. So again, the ACLU supports Amendment 3. We support it as a matter of religious freedom. We don't think that a benefit should be conferred to every other body in the country that not allowed for religious entities. That was the basis of our suit in Virginia. We helped strike down that prohibition. So we support passing this amendment to take out language that, like I said, is actually already functionally obsolete. And that's a brief rundown of what the amendment is, where it came from, what our position is. Again, at the end, I'm happy to take any questions. And now I'm going to turn it over to our other speakers because I know there's a lot more and probably some much more difficult topics to talk about. So again, thank you.
Thank you, Eli, for that. I don't know how you got all of that in 10 minutes, but you did, and you did a good job. So if you have questions, please start formulating your questions, put them in the chat. And we are now going to go on to our Amendment 2 with Rick Wilson. Rick?
Thank you. Thanks for that introduction. And I'm hitting the time button. I'm swearing I'm not going to go over on this one. It's something you get good at the West Virginia legislature, especially if there's a public hearing. And I hope you can see my screen.
We see it.
All right, excellent. Okay. Well, Amendment 2 could have a huge effect, not just on education, but on a lot of services we depend on. So let's do a quick rundown about what this means on the ballot. This is the actual language that's going to be on there, but essentially the short version is this amendment, if passed, would give the legislature the authority to eliminate taxes on business equipment and property, as well as personal property taxes on motor vehicles. And I think this was kind of thrown in as a sweetener to make it more popular, although in fact the lion's share of the tax cuts would go to large businesses, many of which are out of state. And here's why it matters. Property taxes in West Virginia, most of them actually go to local governments. 2/3 go to public schools, and you can see about another third goes to city and county governments to fund a variety of services. I mean, we're talking about parks, public libraries, public safety, 911, fire services, senior programs, you name it, kind of down the line. And only a tiny sliver of it actually goes to state government. So again, Amendment 2 would not eliminate these taxes, property taxes, but it would give the legislature the authority to do so. And we think it's pretty unlikely, if they had the authority, that they wouldn't use it. And what this means, it amounts to over more than 1/4 of the property taxes would fall under the control of the legislature, which would change constitutional protections by our state to protect local government, local voters. And if you think about it, a lot of local property taxes are actually approved of super majorities of voters. People actually tend to set that. I think 44 out of West Virginia's 55 counties have some form of bond or levies that was approved by 60% or more of voters to support all kinds of things, ambulance services, clear down to, again, libraries, public safety. And this will basically override that local control. And as you can see here on this pie chart, we're talking about a little over 1/4 of that. And we can talk as we go on about what this means, but different counties around the state rely on property taxes to, a varying degree from running from 30 to 37%. I'm just using Kanawha County tonight as an example. I mean, if we could probably get data about other counties, but I thought Charleston NAACP. Kanawha is kind of high, more than a quarter of its budget, comes from property taxes. And this is what would mean, this is actually the county breakdown for Kanawha. And again, you can see it's about 60% for the schools and pretty consistent on what goes to county governments and cities. And if this should go through, this would be the amount of loss of revenue if by phasing out the business equipment, machinery, and other personal property taxes in West Virginia. So you see it could be like a $19 million hit in the school excess levy, a little bit more on the school regular levy, for a total of about $47 million that could be taken out of the county if the legislature goes ahead and phases out these taxes. We're talking about 7% of the Kanawha County school budget, but a much higher percent of the overall county budget. As you can see there, pretty high percentage there of that funds the county. And this is, to break it down to get specific, you can see health departments. Golly, what could go wrong with defunding health departments during a pandemic? I don't know. I'll have to get back to you on that one. We're talking fire departments, mental health services, infrastructure, recreation, tourism, visitors things. And again, Kanawha has a nice new library. Hope you guys get to go see it. I went for the first time this week. Here's some other services. But basically, if this goes through, it would also affect not just regular property taxes, but voter approved levies. And what it means is it could mean that if you take this out, then the value of the taxes, like 27% of what goes into what levy support could disappear, or future levies would be more aggressive on their taxation. So homeowners and people with less resources would wind up paying more, since these large business equipment taxes aren't being paid anymore, and which could potentially make levies more unpopular, which could result in defunding a lot of the services and things we care about. And again, this is just like an example of how some city governments use this, and not a huge chunk goes to cities, but as you can see, I mean, everywhere from Smithers to Charleston to Montgomery to Nitro, it would have an effect if it were enacted and if they would actually choose to reduce it. And again, the sweetener thrown into the deal, and actually I think Governor Justice lately is kind of with us on this one, I think with Baby Dog support in opposing Amendment 2. The sweetener in the deal was it would phase out the tax on personal vehicles. But as you can see from this chart, that's a tiny slice of the pie. And by far the lion's share, more than 70%, would go to businesses. And again, many of these are businesses located out of state. So, and again, I think actually the governor this week came out with proposals to actually give people a break on vehicle taxes without phasing out the other taxes that contribute so much to education and other things. So here's what the legislators say they could do. They believe that any loss to county governments, the legislature could make whole from the state budget. And the problem with that is, as you may have noticed, the last couple of years are not normal for a lot of reasons. And for one thing, the state government is flush with federal dollars as a result of COVID. So this is like one-time money. these surpluses are not going to be here forever. And so making decisions based on that, I think is a bit like, okay, I won $100 in the lottery this week, so I'm going to budget every week that I'm going to make $100 and just put that in my budget. And what you will find is that doesn't happen all the time. And so this chart was confusing to me at first, but if you look down at the bottom, it goes back to normal years pre-COVID, and it shows just how much from the state budget they'd have to take from the state budget to make counties whole. And again, this would mean reducing the services the state budget pays for, which are again, public education, higher education, public safety, health and human resources, environmental protection, DNR, recreation and things like that. So it's like, yeah, if you make the counties whole, you'll be taking it out of the state budget, as we've seen. So it's not like, it's kind of dangerous to make long-term decisions based on very unusual situations. And just in terms of research, West Virginia doesn't collect a lot of this data, but the state of Minnesota does. And what they found was that actually the majority of these taxes are exportable. That means the people who pay these taxes aren't actually in the state of Minnesota. And I think that's probably even more true of West Virginia, where a lot of the business equipment are like coal, oil, natural gas, and these are nearly all companies that are based out of state who, make their profits here and take them away and leave us to deal with all the other circumstances. And sometimes supporters of the Amendment 2 say West Virginia is an outlier in taxing this kind of thing. Actually, that's probably not the case. In most other states, regular property taxes are much higher, and they find other ways of taxing business and property. So it's kind of a false argument there that doesn't really hold up. And let's see. Oh, I think I hit the wrong button. I'm sorry, guys. And the other thing I think it's interesting, there's a conservative group, the Tax Foundation, that actually says, as things are now, West Virginia has the 9th best for business property tax ranking in the country. So it's not like, we're some extreme state. This is just clearly an example, I think, of a power grab for politicians to be able to control revenue that actual local voters decide about and vote upon to give tax breaks to corporations, many of which may support politicians who support the amendment. So just saying that. And here's an interesting point based on research in Ohio. Someone did a study, and what they found is by eliminating taxes on equipment, you might actually encourage employers to automate and eliminate jobs by relying more on machinery. And if you know anything about West Virginia, from the song John Henry clear up to our current situation, more and more jobs in the state have been automated, often by tax breaks supported passed by the legislature and supported actually eliminating jobs. So this could have actually a kind of unintentional effect. And finally, as we're getting toward the close, the idea that this is going to have a huge effect on improving West Virginia's business climate really doesn't hold up, because state and local taxes make up less than 2% of the total overall cost of doing business. Most of the cost of doing business are things like paying employers, keeping utilities on, transportation, all the things that you do, marketing and stuff like that. So it is a tiny part of this. And I heard my 10-minute alarm go off. So what we're talking about for businesses, this is a fraction of a fraction, but the hurt it would do to education and other services is not a fraction. It's really pretty serious. So I will stop there. In general, though, it's a power grab. It could really hurt a lot of things we care about. And with that, I will cut it out. Thank you so much for the chance to be here.
Thank you, Rick. I think that that amendment was the amendment that took my breath away. And you did a nice job in explaining it and brought out different points to help me to understand what I need to know in order to go to the polls and to vote as an educated voter. So I'd like for everyone to get your questions together about Amendment 2 and put them in the chat as we move forward. We're doing fine with our time at this time. And Fred Albert, I am a former educator, and I've worked with you and been with you for years, and you're going to talk about Amendment 4. Fred?
Thank you, Brenda. I
I'm
appreciate.
Karen.
I'm Karen. I'm sorry.
I'm the reading
I know who you
specialist.
are. I know who you are.
Brenda was the math teacher. I was the reading specialist.
That's
Okay.
right. That's right. I had Brenda as an instructor when I was a student at West Virginia State University
Right.
in West Virginia College. But thank you very much, Karen, for the kind introduction. I do not have PowerPoints to share with you, but I have lots of information to share, and I'm going to start my timer as well. Karen said that amendment number 2 took her breath away when it was explained. Well, I agree with her. It takes my breath away, but amendment number 4 does even more to me than that. It is very alarming, and I hope it will be alarming to everyone on this call, on this meeting. It is known as the Education Accountability Amendment, which sounds very, very nice. We all want accountability in education. We want the education of our future, of our students, to be the very, very best that it can be. But I'm here to tell you, this is totally a power grab, the way we look at it, the way we view this. The purpose of this amendment is to clarify the rules and policies promulgated by the State Board of Education, and they would be subject to legislative review, approval, amendment, or total rejection. This means that any rule or policy created by the West Virginia Board of Education could be overruled or changed by the state legislature. The legislature would micromanage and approve all policies, waiver requests, curriculum, and other decisions by the State Board of Education. Additionally, it would affect local boards due to the many local issues that ultimately end up needing State Board of Education approval. For example, routine waivers for employing a retiree in a content shortage subject area to obtain a certified teacher is a very common practice. It would need legislative approval for each occurrence if this amendment is approved by voters. This amendment is an attempt to usurp the constitutional power of the State Board of Education with trickle-down effects on county boards of education as well. And AFT goes on record opposing this amendment. We are having meetings all across the state. We had a meeting the other evening in Wheeling. We're going to Raleigh County next Tuesday evening, I believe. We're going to be in Berkeley County on the 24th or the 25th of this month. We've been meeting with our local affiliates throughout the state, but I was at a State Board of Education meeting yesterday, and Deborah Sullivan, one of the appointed board members of the board members we have with the State Board of Education, made a statement, and it is so eloquently written, so eloquently presented. I asked her if I could share her statement because I think this really gets to the heart of the matter. And Mrs. Sullivan, who is a former principal at Charleston Catholic High School, said that she would be honored for me to share her statement with you. So I would like to do that now. She said, proposed amendment 4 politicizes and further imperils public education in West Virginia by undermining the State Board of Education and ultimately the county boards of education as well. The State Board of Education has just one issue in front of it, and that is education. The legislature, by contrast, deals with many issues and can give any one of those issues only a fraction of its attention. The bulk of our efforts focus on education policy and deciding upon county requested waivers to existing policies. Policy work is serious business, and it demands serious attention. To accomplish this work, the board follows a well-defined, inclusive policy development, comment, and adoption process. It is time-tested and it works. And I'll explain something that happened yesterday just to underline the fact that it does work. The board process depends on input from the public, educators, taxpayers, parents, legislators, anyone really who wishes to have a voice in the education of our children. Draft policies are developed and revised with extensive collaboration from educators and others all over the state. Ample time is allowed for submission of written comments from the public. Each comment receives careful consideration by content area specialists and legal experts at the Department of Education and in the field, and by board members. We depend upon this feedback to ensure that policies are supportive of our student achievement and personnel development, reflect state and federal code as appropriate, incorporate best practices, and are clearly written. The state board sets no limits on who or how many may comment or how long their comments may be. And every single comment, both the comment and the response to it, is kept on file in the Secretary of State's office. By contrast, we have seen the legislature act precipitously on the most critical issues with little or no opportunity for public input, and sometimes apparently with little notice to its own members. Notably, when public hearings or public comment is scheduled during a legislative hearing, strict time limits are set, and sometimes that can be as little as 30 seconds for someone to speak to an issue. And generally, there are a few legislators in attendance to listen to the public speakers. Not much can be said, and not much is heard. The real problem with proposed Amendment 4 is that it politicizes education decision-making, content, and practices. Politics is volatile, subject to abrupt change. One thing that teachers can tell you is that the management of education needs continuity, consistency within the individual life of a student. Proposed Amendment 4 would erode our school's ability to ensure that stability. It would also serve to distance those tasked with running our classrooms from the very policies that affect them. Teachers would be expected to take orders from people who know a good deal less than they do about the important business of education. Those working with our youngest residents and those young residents themselves deserve better than this. We look at this as nothing more than a power grab. You know, our State Board of Education, our state board members are appointed by the governor to serve 9-year terms, and they're staggered. And that brings about a great deal of stability with our board members. Our political legislators and senators, they are elected senators for 4 years, but it's an every 2-year cycle with them. And our House of Delegates are elected for 2-year terms. So the legislative body changes every 2 years. That's not stable. We really are concerned about the passage of this amendment because we feel that it opens the door to things like book banning. And if you remember this past legislative session, the hot topic was critical race theory, which is not a thing in our public schools. We do not have critical race theory in our standards. And we said many times that bill that they brought forth about critical race theory was just an answer to a problem that does not exist in our public schools in West Virginia or across the nation for that matter. It is taking power away from local communities, and it puts it into the hands of politicians in Charleston. It eliminates protections for our local schools and our local school boards. So we urge people to vote no on Amendment 4 for the reasons that I said. But let me give you a perfect example of what happened yesterday at the Board of Education. They had a policy out on review for 30 days. It was policy 2419, which deals with special education, the rules for special ed in our state. There were over 350 comments within that 30-day period. 100 of those comments brought about change in that policy, and it was a very much needed change in that policy. I think that goes to prove that our appointed board members do their job. They work with the Department of Education, with the legal department within the Department of Education, and the experts in the Department of Education to try and get things right. Are they perfect? Absolutely not. And I've disagreed with the State Board of Education many times, but they are there. They will listen. And I think that they need to continue to be able to do their job unencumbered by the whims of our legislative body. So my timer just went off. I hope I did Amendment 4 justice. If you have any questions that I can answer, I certainly will try to answer those questions, but I think we're just in very dangerous grounds if we try to give the control of our education system here in West Virginia to the hands of our legislators. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fred. And I like your point, and I like the points of our speakers tonight. When we're taking decision-making away from local communities and giving it to the legislature. And that's something that we have to think about when we're looking at these amendments and what the decision is. And I'm looking, I see Rick Wilson has in the chat, golly, what could possibly go wrong? Think about that. Think about that. And now is the time for our questions. But one thing that I want to say, now is the time for us, those of us that are on the meeting now, to take this knowledge that we have gained and go back into our community. One idea that I had, and I think out of the box all the time, I'm going to hold some red wine and blue discussions here in my home and with people that I know, and invite people over and just talk about it. You know, just casual conversation, crucial conversations. And right now, John Doyle, John, you had several questions, and I'm going to allow you time to ask the questions that you have placed in the chat.
Thank you. I'm scrolling through here to catch up with myself. There were two different amendments that I had questions about. One
was on the corporate property tax.
Yeah. If corporations, I'm assuming that corporation businesses pay taxes on their property, do they not?
Yes, in general they do, but this is specifically focused on like equipment and machinery and things like that. So this is one.
And do corporate entities pay tax on that kind of thing?
They do now.
And so my question is, why would this be any different for an unincorporated business?
I don't think it would be.
Of course, we don't have someone here who can make that case for us, I guess, since we don't have a proponent of this amendment who is a champion of the unincorporated business folks. In fairness to them, I guess I would still like to hear from somebody on that side of the issue, but that was one question that bothered me about it.
I can address that a little bit, John. Like in general, if you have like millions of dollars in equipment and machinery in your business, chances are you're a corporation or a pretty major proprietorship or partnership. I mean,
right, just for protection, just to protect your assets. Is inventory included in that as well? It's the word is in the language of the amendments, but it says tangible machinery and equipment directly used in business activity, tangible inventory, personal property directly used in business activity. I thought of inventory as your stock and trade, the things that you buy and then resell or, you know, something of that nature.
If you
Um,
like, John, I can do some digging and maybe get back and maybe put it in the comment section where this shows up in the Immortal Archives of Facebook.
Okay. Well, the other question that I had was about the administration of education. I'll just read it off the chat. Administration of education is not a function of the legislature. That branch makes law. Why would it be smart for this to be taken away from the executive branch? That is the state school board. And incidentally, the state school board is appointed by the governor, but I believe it has to be, those appointments have to be confirmed by the Senate, do they not? Anyway.
I'm not real sure about that, whether they have to be confirmed or not.
Well,
That's a possibility.
I know that kind of thing occurs on the federal system, but I don't know if that always happens here. Anyway, the function of the executive branch, that is the governor and the administration portions of the state government, that's to administer the laws. Article 5 of the Constitution prohibits infringement of one branch upon the other. I'm wondering, is this new amendment an infringement on the executive branch authority? Does this negate Article 5?
It certainly seems like it would.
Well, that was my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are within our time frame, and I'm just very pleased with our speakers. I want to thank you for the time that you spent in preparing and presenting this evening. I certainly would like to thank our Political Action Committee for the NAACP. And I just want to have some reminders about the upcoming events with our general election, which is November the 8th. And there are candidate forums that are going to be held here in Charleston on October the 18th at Grace Bible Church. We're holding a candidate forum. We're also holding our stroll to the polls. There will be information coming out about how we show up en masse. And we go on the early voting days of October the 29th, which is a Saturday, and also on November the 5th, which is a Saturday. And we will gather together and we will march to the polls and we will vote as a community. There is a new polling place on the west side of Charleston that we do plan to impact. And we're going to meet on 5 corners and have a significant march and vote. So it's important not only to register people to vote, but it's also important to have people to show up to vote. Get your caravans together, your caravans where you go through neighborhoods with your signs and encouraging people to vote, but also let's get our texts, our I'm going to turn this back over to our president, to Ronald English, who will probably end us out in prayer. If there's not Fred, do you have something you'd like to say?
Thank you, Karen. Yes, I do. To answer John's question, I just sent a quick text to my friend Deborah Sullivan on the State Board of Education, and her response is, they are appointed by the governor, but they must be approved by the Senate. So they do require the approval of the Senate once they have been appointed by the governor. So I hope that helps answer that. Thank you.
And I also see in the chat about the October 18th forum that we're going to address the social determinants of health that not only affect communities of color, but low-income communities all across our state. And this is something that we must be aware of. Reverend English, would you like to have any comments?
No, I have one question for Fred. Fred, I really appreciate how you made the point because Jim Lewis and I both had participated in the textbook controversy. And we find that this is textbook controversy 2.0, and therefore it should be recognized in that. But at least the textbook controversy just had to do with the books. But this is wrapped up into critical race theory, which is much more pervasive, across the country.
Right.
And how that, and it's a phenomenon that is not really understood by most folks who talk about it, but it has the momentum for guiding and directing thoughts and support, for something that's very destructive. So I just wonder whether that was any more compact way that we could see what the danger of this particular approach is and what it really means as far as really making racism a part of the curriculum.
That's exactly right. Yes, there's a great fear of that happening. Thank you, Reverend English.
Thank you.
And I see here that Sally has made a comment that, Sally, would you like to address that about the history of state corporations and how West Virginia is left high and dry with money that people come in here, make money, and then they take the money and run, leaving no money here in the state of West Virginia. Sally, who is one of the political action leaders in the NAACP. Sally, do you have comments?
I just would like to say that I think that is something that we may face if Amendment 2 passes. We may end up actually having our own personal home taxes go up. And I fear that. In fact, even one of the representatives from the Eastern Panhandle said as much during a recent discussion he had on Amendment 2. He said that the value of homes would go up and therefore you would be paying higher taxes. Not that they would be charging higher taxes, but that means little to people who, many people in West Virginia, especially who are older and who rely on their home for the rest of their life. And sometimes these increased property taxes on homes will end up making it so that they are no longer able to stay in their home for the rest of their life and have to sell. And so I think it's really important to keep that in mind. I would, for one, would rather have businesses pay that higher property tax rather than average West Virginians. I hate to see all our tax dollars going out of state and then we're left to pick up the tab.
Julie Archer is also on the call with Fair Elections. And Julie, would you just remind us about the deadline to register to vote?
Sure, thanks, Karen. Yeah, I just wanted to remind folks that this coming Tuesday, October 18th, is the deadline to register to vote in this election. And it's always a good idea to check your voter registration status. You can do that really easily by going to govotewv.com, and you can go there, check your status, and update it if if you've moved recently. And if for some reason you find out you are not on the rolls, you can also register to vote online, or you should get in touch with your county clerk right away to make sure you don't miss your chance to have your voice heard in this election.
Are we having problems with people being purged this year, Julie?
I don't know. There's a statutory process that the the Secretary of State and the county clerks go through, where, you know, they regularly remove people from the rolls if they've been inactive or for other reasons. But, you know, it's not an imperfect, flawless, you know, process. That mistakes get made. And so, you know, don't take anything for granted. Just make sure that you're, you check your status, but before that deadline, so you don't miss your chance to vote this election.
It's a very easy process. I know I check all of my family registration to make sure they can still vote. And my son, who had voted in every election, was purged during the last election. And we had to go to the secretary, we had to go to the county clerk's office and re-register him. But it happens, and we have to be aware. And sometimes you have to challenge your vote when, you know, if something happens, to make sure that your vote counts. Pam has her hand raised. Pam? Pamela Nixon?
Yes, I was just wondering if Julie could remind us about how to apply for absentee voting, and also when early voting started, unless I missed that part.
Sure. So the easiest place to really like the go-to, you know, kind of your go-to source of all information related to elections and voting is govotewv.com, and from there you can get all of the information about how to request an absentee ballot. You know, check the eligibility requirements to see if you are eligible. But the county clerks are already accepting applications and have been accepting applications for absentee ballots. So if you are eligible to vote absentee, or if you're going to be, you know, out of town around the election, or even during early voting, you know, get that application right away and request your ballot. If you don't have a printer at home, you can contact the county clerk's office and have them mail an application to you. So that process is, you know, that's going on right now. So there's no need to wait to request your ballot. As far as early voting starts on the Wednesday, the 26th, and runs through Saturday, November 5th. So that's coming right up as well. So we're just not quite 2 weeks from the start of early voting. And as Karen said, there is a new early voting location this election on Charleston's west side at the Black Diamond Girl Scout Council building.
Something, I just checked mine that quick on my phone. And one of the things that we did at my church, we just sat in the back with our phone, because we have many elderly members who may not be tech savvy. And all you have to do is type in your name and your birth date, and it comes right up, and it tells you what precinct, your polling place, because a lot of times with this gerrymandering and everything, and redistricting, they have changed different polling places for people to vote, and people don't know where to go to vote. So you can help people to find out where it is that they need to vote. And I have it here. It tells me where I'm to vote and what precinct that I'm in, and it tells me that my status is active. So this is something that we can do to help people in our community, to help family members and friends. And it's very, very simple to do.
Karen, you raised a really good point, and that's a really good reason to vote early, to either vote by mail if you can, or get out and vote during that early voting period, because because with that, it doesn't matter where you would vote on election day. You don't run into this issue of maybe your polling place has changed and you go to the wrong place. So, you know, don't wait, get out and vote as soon as you can.
Voting is a serious matter. I see that Fred got his phone out. Everybody should get their phone out and do that right now. And it's just such an easy thing to do. And if you learn how to do it, you can help somebody else
That's
in
right.
your community.
It's very quick.
Also, know that if this year, if you do run into difficulty and you've gone to the wrong polling place, that you do have the right to cast a provisional ballot. So never leave without casting a ballot if you can't make it to your correct polling place and you've gone to the wrong one.
And if you do run into problems with voting, please report it. Call Julie, call Sally, call somebody in your community that knows the process, and they can help report that problem, because we have to make sure that our county clerks are aware of problems. Yesterday, I was called, they did a voting drive at one of the high schools in Beckley, and it said for them to fill out the form in pen, blue or black. Well, the people had the children, the young 18-year-olds, to fill it out in pencil. And they took those ballots, they took those applications to the county clerk's office, and the people who objected to the way that they were filled out followed them to make sure they didn't make changes on those applications. So when you see things that don't smell right, make sure you report it. If it doesn't look right, it may not be right. And that's a form of voter suppression. It could be. Yes, Eli.
I also want to plug that if people have problems voting, the ACLU of West Virginia is holding the voter protection hotline that we've had every election for the past couple of years. We'll have the information up on our website, acluwv.org, but the phone number, and I'll put it here in the chat, is 304-355-5012. And we'll have people staffing that all during the early voting period and during the election time too. So if people do run into trouble, they can always contact us on that too, and we are happy to help.
I'm definitely going to get in touch with my friends in Beckley and have them to call you, because it just didn't smell right with what happened to them. Yes, John.
Some of you know that I've been poking my nose into the issue of short notice changes of precinct, changes of location. And what I found, it really disturbs me, because at least in Kanawha County, I guess host is what you would call it, the administrator of the place where voting takes place, such as a school or a fire department or whatever. Sometimes that gets changed with just a couple of days notice for a non-emergency reason. From my review of the thing, it's completely illegal, and the statute itself has some problems. Supposedly, you have to request an emergency change of polling place at least 60 days before the election. Well, that's fine if you can predict emergencies, but you know, that doesn't work. The county is basically just sort of going around the law rather than tripping over it. And I think it does leave a lot of room for voter suppression if an insincere player is involved in administering a place that's normally used for voting and just decides to back out. One school in particular in Kanawha County backed out with a couple of days of notice, both in the primary election in 2020 and also in the general election, and neither one of them was for an emergency reason. And the county commission just rubber stamped it, let it go. They have an obligation to request that the Secretary of State rule on it, and no ruling was made. No request was even made to the state Secretary of State. So, you know, a lot of this is out there, and I'm sure the opportunities for juggling the election are many more than what I've been able to poke into. I've just been doing this personally, and I just hope everybody will be seriously aware that things can go wrong, and they do. Thank you.
Are there any other comments? Marion, you asked me to do this. Marion, I respect you highly. Would you like to make a comment about what you've heard tonight or anything about voting?
I'd like to thank all of our participants and to encourage everyone to make your plan, share your plan, and encourage others to vote. And we'd like to thank the Sisters of St. Joseph's for attending, and like to thank for others that have attended around the state. And I'm sure that if you have any questions, just give us a ring. Julie Archer is our primary person to know all things elections, and we'd like to thank you for coming. Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Eli. Thank you, Karen, Reverend English, and thank you, Rick Wilson.
Does anyone else have any comments or anything they need to say at this time?
This is Robbie Isaiah, and sorry I got in late. I had to work a little bit late. My experience of coming to Kanawha County, and I was in Fairmont area, and that was about 35 years ago. And I sound like an American. I don't have an Indian accent. I'm Indian. And I called downtown and wanted to swap or get my new registration card. And they said, oh yeah, just come on in. And as soon as this woman saw me and knew that I looked like an Indian, but didn't sound like one. And she goes, oh, you have to provide 2-3 documents. And so I already had a registration from Fairmont area. And so if I was a white person, they wouldn't have asked for an ID and supporting documents. So I had to provide my citizenship, and I had to provide my driver's license, and I had my old Fairmont area registration, whatever county that is in, I think, I'm not sure. But so that's one of those things that just an experience that was unpleasant. Just like they didn't trust
Robbie, you were persistent. And what concerns me is how many people are discouraged and don't follow through.
Yep.
And that's why we have to make sure people are informed and that they are persistent, because our vote is our voice.
Mm-hmm.
And we, as minorities, we may not be large in numbers here in West Virginia, but we can make a difference in the way that the turnout and that the results of the elections occur here in our state. So I appreciate you sharing that story with us, because sometimes it is unpleasant, the things that we go through, but we can share our stories and uplift people and give them the courage to do what they need to do. Anyone else? Ray, you always have something to say.
I just want to say kudos here to the Political Action Committee, and this has been very informative for me. And listening to all the explanations from everybody, I thank everybody for a fantastic job and a better understanding of this. I was hoping that if this is recorded, maybe we can share that with the branch and others who might be interested in a more thorough explanation of this, because I thought it was fantastic. Thank you all.
Brenda?
Yeah.
Brenda is one of our officers right now. Brenda, would you like to share anything?
Well, I just wanted to say it's been very informative. I knew nothing about the amendments. And so this has been extremely important to me. I feel, though, that they threw something in with that tax one whenever they put the repeal of personal property taxes on automobiles. It's awfully hard to get people to vote against their own interests, although they do it all the time in West Virginia. But I fear that one may well sort of slip through on us. But I do thank you for this. This has been very, very, very informative. And Fred, it's so good to see you again.
Well, I don't see you, but it's good to hear your voice, Brenda.
Brenda, if I could jump in on that. Go ahead, Fred, sorry.
But because of you, I taught math in middle school for 20 years in Kanawha County, and I think I was pretty successful thanks to you.
Well, Fred, thank you very much. You're very kind. I do appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Do we have any spokesperson from the Wheeling Center? We're so glad that you joined us this evening.
My name's Rose Mathis, and I'm the coordinator up here at Mount St. Joseph. And we are in agreement that it was a very, very informative evening. And I think we have the information that we need to go to the polls and really to make our voice heard. So just really thank you so much for everything that was shared tonight.
Thank you for attending. Andrea Robinson.
Yes, good evening. Member of St. Paul over in St. Albans there, and I live here in Fort Hills in Charleston. And actually, I saw that little plug for joining Charleston NAACP, and I did so while we were meeting. Got a couple questions in the background, so I'll be shooting those up tomorrow when offices are open. But thank you so much for sharing this. I'm a new resident to West Virginia and to Charleston, so I'm excited to see what's coming next.
We look forward to meeting and working with you. Rita Johnson. Sometimes it takes people time to get unmuted. Carolyn Sale. We want to give everyone time to give comment, to feel included. Rita?
Okay, I wanted to say that I found it to be very informative and that I'm very glad that I zoomed in.
We appreciate that. And we are the messenger. We have to be the one who go out into the community and to spread the word and to be the informant so that we will be knowledgeable when we go to the poll. And we're running right on time. I just want to thank everyone for coming, for zooming in. And I hope that you feel the need to come and join our NAACP chapter. We have an active chapter. We have an engaging chapter. We're looking at what we can do to make our communities better throughout Charleston and throughout the state of West Virginia. And our leader, Ronald English, has given us vision and purpose. And I am going to turn it back over to him to close this out in prayer if there's not any other comments or anything that we need to address at this time. And I want to thank you for having me on as your moderator.
Well, Karen, you are a United Methodist, but you have Baptist proclivities for calling folk, for calling folk out and asking them to come on board and that kind of thing, because that was exactly what I was about to say, that there are 9 members of the Charleston branch, NAACP, and the membership is always open. We don't have a membership drive because that was limited to a season. We have a membership strive that goes through all seasons. And therefore, anyone who wishes to join the chapter, our chapter of the NAACP, we are delighted and hope that if you want, even put it in the chat, I will even deliver the application to you. if that will help expedite the matter, because there are some folks on here that I know could make a tremendous contribution. And you see what we are up to. And that's why we said, we don't want you to join the NAACP because you ought to, but because you want to be into what we are up to. And therefore, we know that it would be of a mutual advantage that if we were able to bring that connection together, because we really need your resources. And in that way, we resource each other to do the work that we know needs to be done, has to be done, and only can really get done when we get on it and get about it. And so I'm
And we
just
left off Joe Blair. Joe, do you have anything you want to say? I don't mean to leave off anyone.
No, I guess I'll blame Marion and Rick for being here. So I'm just here because we've been talking about this at the West Virginia Faith Table.
Yes, indeed, yeah. And we are looking to recruit the West Virginia Faith Table to become part of the NAACP as well. So we thank you for being here, Joe. I really appreciate your friendship and conversation that we often are involved in. All right, so thank you for your time together. So let us bow. We thank you again for the information that has been shared, for the conversation that has been enlightening, and for the transformation that we have in mind that would help us to appreciate that though the difficult times we are living in are great, it is still true that when it is darkest, we see the stars. And we thank you for the vision and action and work that has inspired these on this call, and the leadership that has been provided and provoked this call is a sign that when it is darkest, we see the stars. Amen.
Amen. Please share this on your Facebook so that we can get the word out to everyone. Thank you for coming.